everyone, and welcome to the End Honor-Based Abuse webinar hosted by the Iranian Kurdish Women's Rights Organization, or IKWRO. My name is Maryam Pasha, and I will be your host this morning. We are thrilled that so many of you could join us for this extremely important conversation. Now, for those of you who are newer to the topic, I wanted to just take a moment and cover some basics, just so that we're all on the same page. So honor-based abuse or honor-based violence is defined by the Crown Prosecution Service as a crime or an incident which may have been or is committed to protect or defend the honor of family and or community. But make no mistake, honor-based abuse is a human rights violation and a form of domestic abuse. Women and girls are the most common victims of honor-based violence, which can take many forms. Physical abuse, emotional abuse, forced marriage, honor killing. And you're going to hear more about all of this from our speakers in today's conversation. We decided to hold this event today because tomorrow marks the start of the annual 16 Days of Activism against gender-based violence. This is an international campaign starting tomorrow with the International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women and runs until the 10th of December, which is Human Rights Day. The significance of this is that it aims to highlight that violence against women is the most pervasive form of human rights violation worldwide. Now, before I introduce our esteemed speakers, there are three ways in which we want all of you to get involved. First, we want you to ask questions. You'll see a Q&A function on your screen, and if you can use that to type in your questions throughout the session, we'll make sure that at the end we come to as many as we can. The second is to use our hashtag EndHBA with IKWRO, which is the title of this event, and post on social media about today and about everything you're hearing from our speakers. And finally, and I hope by the end of the session you will have no doubt to do this, support IKWRO's work. This year we've made it easier than ever. You can donate by text, just text the word IKWRO to 70085 to donate £5. And if you're able to, consider giving more. We'll share more information about this later. Now, before I get started, I wanted to ask all of you one question. So and we should see this question popping up on your screens momentarily. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you feel talking about honor-based abuse or supporting someone experiencing it? So that should pop up for you. Let's just give everyone a minute to get that submitted, and then I'm excited to see kind of our results. Okay, just a few more seconds there. So if you haven't clicked your answer, please do so. I can see them rolling in now. Okay. All right. Should we have a look at those answers then? Okay. So really interesting and very even distribution here of how people are feeling and how confident they feel. And this question is really important because we're going to come back to it towards the end of this session and see how today's speakers and today's information has impacted how you feel about this topic. So there are three reasons why we're running today's event. The first is that we wanted to increase awareness of this topic. We also wanted for you to become more confident in having conversations with your family, your community, your colleagues. And we also wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the different and multi-sector support system available. So now let's get started with our first speaker. She is the executive director of IKWRO, which she founded in 2002. I have known Diana Nammi for many years, and let me tell you, there was absolutely no way that I could read her entire bio to you because it would probably take the next hour and a half. And so I'm just going to cover a few highlights, but you can obviously find her full bio in the event day program. But Diana has dedicated her life to campaigning for universal human rights. She spent 12 years as a Kurdish freedom fighter, and this year published Girl with a Gun, a book about her early life. Diana's successes include the Justice for Benaz campaign, resulting in the extradition of two perpetrators of this so-called honor killing. Her work has received national and international recognition. In 2014, she was honored as Barclays Women of the Year, and she was also part of the BBC's 100 Women list. So, Diana, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to talk to you, and it is unfortunate that you can't see me nowadays because of the situation and, of course, some problem with technical problem that I had today. I am sorry about that. But just starting the conversation with my mission, why I established IKWRO. When I came to the UK as an asylum seeker and refugee many years ago now, it's about 24 years ago, I have been provided an interpreter, a Kurdish, lovely Kurdish woman, to help me to enroll my daughter at her school. She was very young and very friendly woman, very open-minded. She used to come to our house and take us out and make us familiar with the area that we used to live in London. She came with us on two occasions to school to enroll my daughter, and it was lovely. But in the third occasion, she didn't turn up. She didn't leave the message for me, not for school. And it was not fair. As I say, she used to come to our house and take us together to school. So I was started getting worried about her. When I went home, I called her office and I talked to one of her colleagues in her office and asked about her. I told her that she didn't turn up into the session today. And they told me that she is dead. Her name was Sophia. Of course, I was very upset with the death because it was, you know, something I never could imagine that happened because she was very young, not any sign of illness. So I was thinking that she had a road accident or something. But I asked the same question, and they told me it wasn't a road accident, but it was that her husband suspecting that she was flirting with one of her colleagues. So they planned and to take her back to Iraqi Kurdistan. They killed her in Iraq. The husband returned back. By the time I was talking to their colleague, the husband was in the UK after she was killed. So I was very upset with that case. When I was back in Iran and Iraq and Kurdistan, I never thought that things like that would happen in the UK. And because I always thought that women's rights and human rights have been highly implemented and respected in European countries, so you never hear any news about honor killing cases. So it happened for me on the very first few days that I entered the UK. So I thought I have to do something for this case. And I was sure that she was not the first and she was not the last. So I decided, with the help of a friend that could speak English, to call police, which we did. At that time, I called police and I told them that I told them the same story that I am telling you today. Police officer told me that because the incident happened in Iraq, so it's Iraqi police duty to investigate the case, not us. I told them that in Iraq there is no any law against honor killing, and it is a family matter, and the police leave it for the family to do whatever they can do with with women within the family, and honor killing is not a crime. And I told police that she was a British citizen, though. They told me still it doesn't help. They cannot investigate the case. So I was a bit hopeless. I tried to persuade the police really to follow up the case, to investigate the case. And I told them that this is an honor killing and they killed her. And the husband, I heard that he is now here in the UK. And police told me that honor killing is your culture. We have to respect that. Otherwise, you would call us racist. I was shocked by police reaction at that time. What I was hoping that they would grab the case, investigate the case, and feel and make all the attempts and effort to find out what happened for this British citizen woman who happened to be a Kurdish and killed in Kurdistan. And I was thinking, if she was a white woman, would she still be ignored? So it was lots of question for me. I find it out that the issue of honor killing definitely is not a matter of violence against women for police and definitely for other organizations. They see it as a culture which has to respect. And in my opinion, it was a crime and should it be treated as a crime, not as a culture. This is very clear. And I felt that why they say it's racism. In my opinion, if police and any other organization didn't help women at risk of honor-based violence or didn't investigate the cases of honor-based violence under the name of, protecting police for people from calling them racist, this is exactly racism. And we have to fight it. This became an issue for me, and I thought that racism should be on our table to deal with that on the daily basis, and we shouldn't allow ourselves to sacrifice our women, our girls, the vulnerable people in the community for the fear of racism. So if racism make us to ignore the violence within community, so what does it mean? It means that we allow our women, especially our girls, suffer both by racism and the fear of honor-based violence. We raised our first campaign. It was called Stop Honor Killing. And from then, our organization also, we set up the organization in 2002. It's called Iranian and Kurdish Women's Rights Organization. We set up to help women like my interpreter, Sophia. The organization started to help only Iranian and Kurdish at that time, but because it was the only language we could speak, but we extended our services for Iranian, Kurdish, Arab, Afghan, and Turkish. Let's say MENA Women's Rights Organization. We provide advice and advocacy in Farsi, Kurdish, Arabic, English, Turkish, and some other languages. We provide free counseling services in Farsi, Kurdish, Arabic, and English. We set up our refuge in 2015. Since then, we hadn't got any void, and the demand for our refuge is high. We provide trainings for professionals and for people within the community to raise awareness for women to raise awareness about their rights and entitlement, and for professionals to identify the cases. We campaign against honor-based violence, and we manage over the years to make honor-based violence as part of the literature, as part of the activities, and as a form of violence that has been identified by government, and it is part of the violence against women strategy for all organizations in the UK. Our campaigns over the years make a wave around the world, not only in the UK, but raise awareness about honor-based violence, forced marriage, child marriage, and FGM around the world. IKWRO is, we can say that we are a very proud organization at what we have done. And we annually, through Honor Award, we are recognizing all the professionals that actively fight against honor-based violence and save lives, and in memory of all the victims of honor-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, for that. I think it's so important that we understand how this all started and kind of the work you've done to get us to this point. So, and we'll be coming back to you in the Q&A. So thank you very much for that. So for people who've experienced honor-based violence and for the wider community, it's really important to know that there is work being done by people across the police service, which is why we're joined by our next speaker, Inspector Alan Davis. Inspector Davis joined the Metropolitan Police Service in 1996 and leads Project Azure, the Met's strategic response to FGM. He works closely with the National Police Chief Council lead for honor-based abuse and is the national lead for Operation Limelight, a high-profile multi-agency safeguarding operation focusing on harmful practices at the UK border. Alan is also the author of comprehensive national guidance to support designated safeguarding leads in schools and colleges, which is more important than ever these days, given how many children were out of school during the pandemic. It's my pleasure to please welcome Inspector Alan Davis.
Many thanks, and it's a real honour to be speaking at this event today. So what I wanted to do was to give you an overview of the work that takes place in London and elsewhere in relation to harmful practices. So much of what we do is based on partnerships, and it's working through with statutory services such as health, social care and education. But I think most importantly, it's working with those in the voluntary sector who really understand what's taking place within the communities. From my perspective, I've been involved in this work for just over 5 years, and I started by looking primarily at FGM and child abuse linked to faith and belief. But you have to have a real in-depth understanding of all of the harmful practices and how they interrelate, and how the concepts of honour and belief drive a lot of the vulnerability and criminality that we need to challenge and to protect those that are vulnerable. So on your screen, I'm just going to give you an overview of the governance and the strategic forums that are in place within policing and elsewhere to make these partnerships work. We have a national lead for honour-based abuse, Commander Ivan Balhatchit, so he's the national policing lead, and I work quite closely with him. What we also have is a national working group on child abuse linked to faith and belief, and that's led by an academic called Dr. Lisa Oakley, and again, it brings together statutory and non-statutory agencies and professionals who are committed to challenging abuse, particularly linked to witchcraft and spirit possession beliefs. I think what we've done quite successfully in London is bring all of these partners together within the London Harmful Practices Working Group, and that drives a lot of the activity so that we can truly work in partnership to respond to the many challenges that we face. Within the London Harmful Practices Working Group, we've got 4 subgroups that drive a lot of the activity that we're involved in. So we have organisational learning and training, and this is really important. It's to reflect on where we're at and sometimes where we go wrong with investigations. And I think what we have to stress from the outset is these are really complex, resource-intensive investigations where many professionals, whether they be in policing or outside, don't necessarily get the dynamics and nuances and the complexities with the really challenging risk management that goes with these issues. Because as we know with honour-based abuse, there will be often you'll have multiple perpetrators involved, highly committed offenders that seek to control and to sort of regain honour and power within the family dynamics. And it's about how we keep people safe, how we as organisations work together to support individuals, many of whom aren't seeking criminal justice outcomes. What they want to do is feel safe. They don't necessarily want to prosecute those that are closest to them, who unfortunately are causing the harm to them. What's also really important is that we train our officers, and we also train those that work in this field so that they understand the dynamics and the interrelationships that takes place so that we can manage this risk as effectively as possible. What we also need to do is make sure we understand what the data does and doesn't tell us, and this is across all of the harmful practices. As I said, I've got a background in FGM, so it's recognising with FGM where there's probably more data available because of the information that's held by health and others. How those, what that data tells us, and about how what the prevalence is of these issues. What we do know is that they're massively underreported, and we need to recognise and we need to challenge that. Communications is really important. It's around how we get messages out there, who are the most appropriate messengers, and what the message that needs to be out there. And it's around magnifying each other's messages so that we can try and encourage reporting, encourage people to come forward and to seek support. And I think that has to be very much partner-led, because partners have the reach and the relationship with communities that sometimes statutory sectors just don't have. And I think prevention is also really important. And we talked earlier about some of the work we've done with schools. I think education is really key to this. If we really want to challenge the mindsets and the beliefs and it's around recognising what these issues are, that they are human rights violations, we need to start early, and we need to work with schools so that young people are educated, and that those the schools have the confidence to be able to identify vulnerability and share that information with those that can do something about it. So what prepared here is just an overview of what we do. So we have quite effective governance now at national and regional levels, and we bring partners together. We work closely with a myriad of partners through the London Harmful Practice Working Group. I have a small team, but they're highly specialist in what they do, and they're able to advise and support investigating officers who don't deal with this on a daily basis, and we can provide that support and signposting to other agencies outside of policing. We need to enhance the training and awareness of all the harmful practices and how these issues interrelate and what causes them. We need to work more closely together with colleagues across the Met and externally across the UK and bring that best practice together. And we've also got to recognise that these are international issues, and that there is a distinct international flavour to the to much of the offending, which and to the vulnerability. People are taken abroad and are victims, as we heard from Dion's case study earlier, so that our reach is far broader than it was due to the changes in legislation, which has brought extraterritorial powers to what we can now do. And it's around how we work with our international partners. And we work, for instance, we work very closely with US colleagues around FGM so that we can share information and best practice. What is it we're after? Well, very broadly, we need to increase the levels of reporting. We need people to have the confidence to come forward and to share the information with police and partners. So we need to increase the number of referrals and of FGM, forced marriage, child abuse linked to faith and belief, and honour-based abuse. My experience is that people often don't just walk into the police station to report these issues. The vulnerability is identified by our partners, and that information is shared through multi-agency referral processes. So it's around making sure that the information is shared so that we can be involved in the response. Protection orders are really useful tools in our armoury, and we're very keen to have these civil orders because they actually prevent the harm rather than having to respond to it subsequent to the so they're very preventative in nature. Obviously, we work closely with our colleagues to improve investigations and to improve outcomes for those that are victims of them. And I think what we also need to do is improve the quality of the harmful practices intelligence. And that's getting community information and having actionable intelligence that we can respond to. Just to give you an example, throughout COVID, we were running conference calls with our partners every fortnight, and we were trying to understand what's happening with the harmful practices. And I think quite broadly that the risk will have increased as a result of the economic shock and that the as well as the health harms that the disease will bring. So in relation to honour-based abuse, obviously financial security is a big issue that's causing friction in many families. We recognise that perpetrators of HBA will seek to control finances and benefits, that HBA perpetrators will have more time on their hands to look for victims. HBA victims will feel isolated and will struggle to access support and maybe experiencing deteriorating mental health. We've heard of reports of increased HBA and honour killings internationally in Iraq, Kurdistan and Afghanistan, and that will have an impact here. And we've obviously got concerns very much around the vulnerability of LGBT plus young people or those with disabilities who maybe in unsupported family, often family homes, might be bullied, and with our LGBT young people subject to homophobic abuse within the home and neighbourhood. So we're talking about complex situations. And to finish, is to recognise that knowledge is power. We encourage everyone to be professionally curious. Don't be put off about talking about what are seemingly taboo subjects. We want to normalise conversations about these issues. It's okay to ask if people are okay, and to recognise that these issues do play out and there is a significant vulnerability where people are killed because of it. We have to recognise them for what they are. They're human rights violations. The risks are real. They might be increasing, but that risk is hidden. So it's our job collectively to recognise it, talk about it, share that information, and to include police in that response. So thank you, and I will hand back to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Alan. It's excellent to see how all of these different, as you said, partners are coming together to leverage their knowledge and their networks and their reach to address this issue. And continuing along that line, next we're going to be looking at safeguarding and children's support systems. So our next speaker is Anne-Marie Christian. She's a safeguarding practitioner and qualified social worker. She's worked for various local authorities on the front lines and is a safeguarding advisor to schools. In 2003, she managed a child protection team for a local authority, supporting 75 local schools with child protection advice, training and consultancy, as well as working with various organizations like the NSPCC. Her work focuses on raising awareness of child abuse and promoting child protection around the world. Over the last few years, Anne-Marie has delivered trainings and keynotes in Dubai, Singapore, Jamaica, Japan, and Armenia. Thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you. So they've definitely been very passionate from the very start of my career working in child protection and social work. And again, what I'm talking about today is about violence against women and children. So with the children, we also include boys, under the age of 18. And I've been exposed to this throughout my career. Even now on the front line, being 10 years independent and international, I still have experienced that. So I've always kind of been exposed to it where I could be more proactive and raise that profile to my colleagues in various settings. And again, it's just important that we kind of understand it from the reality of the times we're in now. For example, in 2020, it looks very different now, as in, a bit more international, like what you were saying. And I'll explain that in what I'm going to talk about today. So it's kind of, I've had lots of experiences of it. And once you can see it, for example, and the understanding of the patterns that you kind of see, it becomes quite consistent, and then you feel more confident in answering that. And, you sort of see it from, a young person being chaperoned by their family. And also, I'd like to highlight to people listening today, we say children, but also we mean young adults and adults too. Just because they're over the age of 18, it doesn't mean they're safer. If anything, there could be more things there about pressure on them to be kind of, dictated to by their family, where they have to do and respect what their family say. So what I'll be talking about today is discussing that from the child under 18 to obviously young adults and adults, and also people who are inexperienced, in particular relationships, marriages, or general families where as an adult they're still kind of pressurized to be part of that, and the fear of the honor-based abuse. So again, the conversations I've had, sometimes people contact me independently, as well as in my career as a social work manager. And again, we talk about training later. It's just important that, I sometimes have seen my frontline social workers feeling uncomfortable making a judgment about a non-British family, in the fear of being called racist. I think Alan sort of touched on that as well. And I think it's just important that we have a courageous conversation with our colleagues, if you are a professional in that sense, working on the front line, but also if you're somebody who knows it's happening within a setting or in a family or worried about it, again, having that courageous conversation with the right person. So I know in every country, when I do my international work, every country has a child line helpline. There's an international helpline in every country to support young people and families. Every country has NGOs, non-government organisations that work and support families around violence against women and children, even though in some countries there may be no laws or very kind of weak laws where it hasn't been activated. So again, the kind of conversations I've had has been, it feels like, the lighthouse kind of syndrome, where wherever they go, they're being watched. The light is shining on them wherever they go. Boys and girls, as I said, with young adults. And the whole thing of where, compared to a young person who's not experiencing it, they will be more independent. They can go out with their friends. They can, go out and socialize. They can choose their partners. They can do lots of things. They can express who they want to be, whether it's gender identity, sexuality, etc. But for young people who are experiencing it in that sense of the fear of the honor-based abuse, in that sense, it's very different for them, and they can see that quite soon as they're growing up. So I've had lots of cases where it's not spoken about. It's just something that's just happens in a family. I'll talk about a scenario that I was involved in, and it's an interesting one. It involves a boy and a girl, a brother and a sister. And it was one that was open to a team that I was managing. And it was just so interesting that the young boy went to a boys' school. He was 15 at the time, and it was quite clear for himself that he had to repress his identity, his sexual orientation of what he wanted to be, because he knew within his family he wouldn't be understood, appreciated, or even allowed in that sense. So based on that, this young boy kind of took it on himself to control what he was doing. Therefore, it resulted in an eating disorder, and he was referred to the local services regarding counselling, etc. And then in some of this work he was having in that service, he also disclosed abuse from home. He told the counsellor and his school in a comfortable way about the physical abuse he'd kind of experienced from his father. And obviously this triggered off a kind of Section 47 child protection investigation in social care in my team. And then we looked into it and investigated it. When we went to speak to this young person about the same, disclosure that he mentioned, he retracted his statement. He said, he made it up. The original statement he made was very clear, very consistent, but obviously as time went on, he retracted his statement. Again, with my experience, I knew that's a classic sign of not in control of what I said, what's going to happen next, the reality of death, the reality of having no control about what's going to happen. So my social worker did a home visit, etc., and kept coming back to me saying, almost there's no progress. So I, as a social work manager, did a home visit with my social worker, and we can see the environment in the home. You had a mother who was quite mute in the kind of conversations, but at the same time had a bit of fear, but also loved her children and felt uncomfortable with what was going on, but unable to say anything. Again, you saw a very dominant father. In this particular household, the children had to leave all of their keys and their mobile devices by the front door in a box. There was lots of control in this home. They weren't allowed to go out on their own. They had to be in at a certain time. And yeah, it was quite interesting. And then the more I, as a manager, was pursuing the father and this family around wanting information, the more they were closing in, the more angry and irate in relation to get out of my house, etc. And then in working with the school and supporting the school with supporting the young boy again to feel able and comfortable to say what was happening to him. What was interesting was, again, the father then took the child out of school and said he was going to put the child in a religious school, a religious boarding school. Okay. So obviously, you know, we have something in education where we need to know where the child's going. You've got a system about school to school where, you know, we call it children missing education, because we know there's kind of lots of concerns there around children who do go missing. So for the same reasons. So what we kind of did then, we pursued again father for the name of the school, and he refused to give us the name of the school. So in this again, on the 11th hour, knowing that I kind of said to him, we don't get it by a certain time, we're going to get the police involved potentially, and it will be another kind of scenario based on what we're really concerned about with this family. Interestingly enough, over the weekend, hence social care in the job I was doing then closed at 5 o'clock on a Friday. We had emergency services after that, but then I came back to my office on the Monday for 9 o'clock. I was told at the weekend when we got back on the Monday that at the weekend there was a sister in this home, and she was at sixth form. And what was interesting, she hadn't gone to college for 2 days. And she texted her tutor and told her tutor that they booked a flight to Pakistan and she was going to go and marry somebody in Pakistan. So with that, we kind of, obviously the police got involved over the weekend. When I came in on the Monday, she was in police protection. The police have gone forth and gone for the kind of the forced marriage kind of order that at the time, it's just after 2015 around the Crime Act, etc. And I know that at the time it was something that was quite new, but it was working, passports were removed, etc., etc. So it was really powerful at that time, but it was just interesting, the dynamics in this family. The young girl was spoken to as part of obviously the assessments we were doing, but was unable to say anything, yet it was still happening right in front of us. So in sharing that experience, I suppose, it just highlights, even when we are involved in social care, even when schools kind of know what's going on, the reality is it's very hard for us to intervene, for young people to feel able to say, knowing the reality of death is there. It's the fear, but it's the reality of the fatality being real, being something they've heard of, again, in their home countries, of being real. I know in the UK, we've got the Children's Act 1989, the welfare of the child being paramount. I know we have the whole thing about children have rights and wishes and feelings. They've got a right to be a child. And we take race, culture and religion into account. So it's fine for us to say that, but I also appreciate what it was like for that family. I just quickly want to share before my kind of time runs out here. I know we've only got a short space of time, that right now I've seen it with young adults and adults who contact me again, who have the same scenario, being chaperoned, etc., even though they might have a very professional job, but still controlled in that way, where again, they go on social media and they're groomed online because they're vulnerable in a way where, you know, they're controlled, they go online. And I've seen again a pattern of people being exploited in that way as well. So again, my last comment would be, we need to be culturally sensitive, but at the same time have a courageous conversation and, you know, not be in fear of being called any labels, but be clear that we need to advocate and be that person to empower and continue to ask those right questions for justice for families. So thank you very much. And I hope that was very kind of useful in sharing that experience.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. It's excellent to hear from your experience, and again to help us build a fuller picture of what's happening here and the services available. So, our next speaker is going to add another kind of slice of the pie. She's here to help us understand the ongoing the ongoing impact on an individual's life when they've experienced honor-based violence, and the ongoing impact on their mental health. So we'll be exploring how we deal with it, how it manifests, and the support that exists. Dr. Savin Bapir-Tardy is a counseling psychologist and registered as a practitioner psychologist with the Health and Care Professions Council in the UK. Savin has worked with IKWRO for over 7 years within the counselling team with women who've experienced domestic violence, honour-based violence, forced marriage, and FGM. She also works with her clients in her clinical practice, Mindsight Centre. Savin is a lecturer in psychology at the University of West London and is also engaged in research in the area of mental health and gender-based violence. Over to you, Savin.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I have worked with IKWRO for a few years within the counselling team. During that time, I worked with a number of women who were at different stages on their journey to recovering from the abuse that they had experienced. Each of the women that I worked with had a unique story, but what was similar are the tactics of abuse that they had endured, but most importantly, the challenges that they faced in seeking support. Up to this day, we do not have any guidelines in how we can appropriately work with survivors of honor-based abuse. And many professionals within the mental health sector often rely on the guidelines that are available for survivors of domestic abuse. But I would like to highlight that what is similar between those two forms of abuses are the tactics of abuse. That is, the same tactics are used by the perpetrators to maintain power and control over the victim. But I do want to make distinctions between honor-based abuse and domestic abuse for two reasons. First, when it comes to mental health, the consequences are different. And secondly, the needs that the victims need are varied considerably. So, for example, in the case of domestic abuse, it has been widely recognized that women are at higher risk when they attempt to flee the violent relationship. And violence can escalate because there is an attempt by the perpetrator in preventing the victim from leaving. However, when it comes to honor-based abuse or even forced marriage, the danger is not concentrated in one specific period, but it's rather persistent. And this issue seems to be underestimated, and it is often assumed that once a woman leaves, then they are safe. Another distinction is that women who experience honor-based abuse, when they flee, even if they are experiencing severe forms of domestic abuse, they will be disowned by the family and the community. So this fear of being disowned creates also an additional barrier which prevents victims from seeking support, because being disowned means that they have to live their life as they know it. Another issue is that women who experience honor abuse are also in need of practical support, and this practical support needs to be met first prior to any mental health intervention. During my time with IKWRO, I worked with a number of women who had sought help within the mainstream mental health services. And what they experienced was an inappropriate subjugation to the medical model. That is, they took their symptoms and made the assumption that they must be suffering from a mental health issue, rather than taking into account their current circumstance. With this, what I want to highlight is that when it comes to mental health, the mental health consequences of honor-based abuse, we know that they are complex. But to this date, there is no research that actually explains or has even documented the consequences. But what we know from very limited research studies that have been conducted in the UK, in the United States, even in European countries, they consistently find that women from ethnic minorities are at a higher risk of suicidal ideations and suicidal attempts, and also self-harm. And what the researchers note is that amongst ethnic minority women, they're at a higher risk, not because of a genetic or biological explanation, and not even because that there is a pre-existing psychiatric diagnosis, But what they cite as an explanation is that the violence that they face, so that is violence, honor-based violence, or the type of domestic violence, makes them more vulnerable. So the reason why they are at a higher risk is because of practical issues that they face. Why am I mentioning these studies is because for every practitioner working with victims of honor-based abuse, I want to emphasize that it is important to take into account their circumstances. Don't assume that they're in distress because of anxiety or because of PTSD. Most of the time, they are in distress because the dangers are real. It's not just in their mind. Secondly, as Anne-Marie mentioned, a number of colleagues, when I deliver training on these issues, they have expressed a lack of confidence in addressing or exploring certain issues because they feel that they might offend the individual, or because they see their issues from the frame or the lens of being cultural within their culture. And I want to highlight that please look beyond culture, look beyond any justification, because when there is abuse, it's abuse. Nothing can justify abuse. So please listen to them here, take into account not just don't see their issues just from the lens of mental health issues, but take into account their practical needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Savin. I think it's really important to understand how the kind of mental health picture plays into this as holistic kind of view of this issue. Okay. Sometimes when we talk about honor-based abuse, the voice that is not put alongside the experts is someone who has lived experience of all the things that we've discussed today, which is why I'm very privileged to introduce our next speaker. Payzee Mahmod is a Kurdish immigrant and a Londoner. She has experienced FGM and child marriage, and her sister Benaz's life was tragically taken in a so-called honor killing. Payzee has worked tirelessly to raise awareness of honor-based violence and abuse and child marriage through campaigning with IKWRO, and her voice and her work has reached an international audience. She has spoken widely on the need to change the laws around child marriage and honor-based abuse, including in the Sunday Times and the BBC, and her TEDx talk about her experience and this campaign has over 500,000 views. Through her speeches at Parliament, meeting with government officials and with the Home Office Minister, Payzee campaigns for better education, training, and legislation to finally make child marriage a crime. Payzee, over to you.
Such a warm welcome, and thank you to all colleagues and audience for being with us this morning. This event is a very big deal for me because I feel like I've been dreaming about using my voice for a very long time, almost 15 years now. And it's really a full circle for me to be at this event with IKWRO, because the first time I saw a woman who looked like me and was fighting for women like me, I couldn't believe my eyes, and it was such a life-changing moment for me. I saw Diana Nammi, a Kurdish woman, standing outside the Old Bailey and demanding justice for my sister, someone that she didn't know. And I wanted to join in with her so badly, but at the time I couldn't because my voice was silenced. And I was very confused and very conflicted and also very heartbroken. I had just lost my sister Benaz to a so-called honor killing. I had just managed to divorce a man that I was coerced into marrying who was twice my age. And my father and my uncle had just been found guilty of my sister's murder. By the time I was 18, I had already experienced all of this and so much more. So being here today and having a voice makes me feel very privileged. I think a lot of people may have heard of my story and my sister's story. And since sharing this story, I've felt such a tremendous amount of support from people to join in this fight to end honor-based abuse. And I thank everyone who's done their part so far and who will continue this. For anyone who's with us today and is engaging in this conversation for the first time, I hope that after today, you will be inspired by having listened to everyone and energized to continue and join into carrying this conversation forward with us. I think for the most part, people know me as a survivor, and I sometimes dislike being referred to this way because I feel that I'm more than surviving. But at the same time, I do accept the reality that, and this is quite a harsh reality, it's that I've survived something that many girls don't. And it's something that my sister Banaz did not survive from. It's something that I am reminded of every day. So believe me when I say that I'm speaking today, not just with my own voice, but my sister's voice and millions of girls and women who can't use their voice, because that's the reality. I want to tell you today a little bit more about what happens once you've been a victim of honor-based abuse and how do you manage life without it afterwards. Well, for me, it's not really just been surviving, but it's been a case of rebuilding myself for at least 15 years. And it's something I'm still doing to this date. For me, the first decade was denial. That was pretty much my answer to everything. I had to block out everything that had happened, but not just what had happened, and also the people that had made those things happen to me, the people you consider the closest people to your family. I had to completely refuse and accept anything that I was a witness to, leading up to all the tragic events such as my sister's death and my marriage and everything else. For me, convincing myself that those things didn't happen was painting somewhat of a picture perfect life for myself, because part of the mental and emotional abuse that goes into honor-based abuse was constantly asking myself, were things really that bad? Was I making things bigger than they were in my head? I mean, the first time that I found out that me and my sisters had undergone FGM, it was a very casual conversation. It wasn't a big deal. And it was communicated to me and my sisters as something that had to be done, and that all the girls around me went through this. So it made me think, surely I wasn't special not to have to go through it. And even though I knew that one of my sisters almost died from the procedure, I was told it's not such a big deal because she was still with us and she was still here. When my father told me not to speak or even look at the man that I was coerced into marrying, my dad didn't physically force me. He just told me this was to protect me and that he knew what was best for me. And when my entire community, the police and everyone surrounding us failed my sister time and time again until it was too late, I asked myself, was it just a missed opportunity? And it wasn't. Those things were bad. I wasn't making them bigger in my head. They were absolutely terrible and they should have never happened. And that's the thing that I really want to drive home today, is that with honor-based abuse, there are so many layers of mental coercion, manipulation, and control that factor into it. Building the courage to just accept that this is happening is a whole ordeal in itself, let alone trying to seek help. And I think it's been mentioned already in this conversation. Typically, we know domestic abuse to be someone closely connected to you. But the thing is, with honor-based abuse, it isn't just the partner. It can be your partner, but it's also them, their family, your family, distant relatives, community members. And you're dealing with such a multi-layer of perpetrators that it's incredibly difficult to seek help and to acknowledge what you're going through. And because of that, it takes such a long time to get there, because you're trying to escape from everything and everyone. For me, when I started this journey of activism about 1.5 years ago, I would often have conversations with someone who I feel is a very special woman to me. She's almost like a mentor, Sarah Brown. I used to debate with her about whether my marriage as a child was even forced, because I couldn't even begin to accept that that was my reality. I had to go through a long journey of understanding that actually as a child, I was coerced and I didn't have any consent and any informed take on what was happening. Although I was made to believe that I had a choice, I didn't. I was told through very clear non-verbal behaviors that this is what I had to do, whether I liked it or not. And as somebody who grew up in that environment, I knew that language very well. I understood it very well because I was trained and groomed to go with those choices all of my life. And that's another thing I want you to understand, is that it doesn't suddenly start. It's a process of grooming from a young age. And from the moment you act in any way where you're trying to establish your own identity, and any behavior can very quickly be described as dishonorable. Just to give you a few examples, just, really simple everyday things I think a lot of people can contribute to honor-based abuse. It can be wearing makeup, it can be having a boyfriend, smoking, or wearing clothes that can be deemed as revealing or too Western. To put it into simple terms, all of these things can put you in danger because the family will be perceived a certain way within their social circles and their communities. And really think of it like this: to have an open mind. You can find this anywhere where patriarchy, sexism, and a high level of conservativeness exists. This is where honor-based abuse thrives. And you don't have to look like me to experience it. That's another misconception a lot of people have, is that only certain people experience this. And girls like me, girls who look like the way they look, can experience this just because of the environment that they grow up in. It's not just my community or any particular community. And that's the only way that we can all spot the signs that someone is going through this and check if they're experiencing this, by keeping an open mind. Because even in me and my sister's case, my 4 sisters, there was still a level of ignorance from people on the outside because we simply didn't look oppressed enough. I get messages from girls literally every single day on social media, from girls all over the world, about their own experiences of this. And so I want to tell you, don't think of my story and Banaz's story as a rare story and as something that happens very rarely. It's not. These are just the stories that you hear about. And there are so many more. There are millions more out there. But the question is, once they get to a place where they can see what's happening and they can get help, will they be seen and will they be heard? And once you're safe from that abuse, what does it actually mean? What does a survivor mean for you? For me, there was often days I couldn't convince myself that my life was even worth living. I had to answer so many questions. Often I couldn't even answer those questions because you try and make sense of it and you try and get the answers to other people's actions and you can't. And I wore a mask for so many years. Many people around me, a lot of people very close to me, weren't aware of my story. That was my way of surviving. But I'm glad to say that it has become more than just living from one day to the next for me. And it has taken me a long time, but I finally started to live my life and take steps towards healing from all the years of what was honor-based abuse. And I'm now trying to build a future and maybe one day even build a family of my own. That word family for me is something that is forever molding, even to this very day. I feel quite privileged and quite lucky to have a strong support system around me. And I feel very proud to work with individuals who feel passionate about keeping girls and women safe from this. And I feel extremely hopeful knowing that organizations like IKWRO are there for women and girls who need these resources and need this support. But I also acknowledge that there needs to be a lot more strengthening in the funding and the resources that are available for women to flee from these environments. Because what happened to me and so many other women around the world doesn't stop the day we leave the situation. As you've heard throughout today, the effects can be devastating and they can lead to years of emotional baggage and trauma. And although I've managed to be here today, I'm still on the journey of healing. And what I want you to bear in mind from what I've said is how many girls can't even take that first step? How many girls will never be able to get to where I am because of the lack of support and resources available to them? For all these years that me and my sisters were going through what we went through in our house, when everybody thought that our life looked normal from the outset, when nobody asks any questions, any professionals, neighbors and teachers. I want you to know that the girls like me and my sisters exist all around you. They are at your workplaces, they're in your place of education, they're in your social groups, they're your neighbors. They are everywhere. But the real question is, do you see them? And do you have the confidence to approach them, to just ask them if they're okay? So I do hope that, having heard all the speakers today and myself, my testimony, that this is something that will encourage you to start this conversation and to see this topic as something that we need to engage in, because it does affect millions of girls and women around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Payzee, for sharing that with us, for sharing your journey, and for not just telling us what you've experienced and what you survived, but also how you're rebuilding your life, what that means, and how we need to think about each of these individuals who are experiencing honor-based violence as full people with lives before and after, and how, you know, they can rebuild them and how we can support them to do that. I want to conclude by just making an observation, but this is just before we move on to the Q&A, which is to say that, you know, when Diana founded IKWRO in 2002, so much of the support and knowledge and awareness and systems that we've discussed today, that our speakers have shared today, did not exist. It's through the work of people like Diana, of organizations like IKWRO, of you know, survivors and people with experience of honor-based violence like Payzee, of professionals like Savin and Anne-Marie and Alan, that we are now today having a much more holistic support system, but also much closer to ending honor-based abuse. No, we're not done, but there's a path now and a future where we can imagine this coming to an end. And I think that's a really hopeful place to be. So I want to thank all of our speakers. I want you to make sure that all of you watching are typing in your questions. And while you're finishing up your questions, I want to go back to that question we asked all of you at the very beginning. And if that should, I don't know if that's going to pop up on our screen again. Let's just see if we can get that up there. Okay, great. So we've asked you that question again, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you feel now talking about honor-based abuse or supporting someone experiencing it, with 1 being the least confident and 10 being the most confident? And just let that come through now. Okay, just a few more minutes while we finish that up. Okay. All right. Well, what's really encouraging here is is that we've seen a real shift in the numbers from people who were kind of feeling not super confident. We had a lot of people around the 3, 4, 5, 6 mark, and now I feel like most of you have shifted to a 6, 7, 8, 9, and even some 10s, which is really amazing. And I think that, you know, one of the things about this event is that we want it to sit with you, for it to percolate, and I know that once you think more about everything you've heard today, you're going to be even more confident. So let's get to some questions, and I want to start here. Alan, one for you. So the question says, arguably people report honor-based abuse, but sometimes it sits in the domestic abuse pot, where professionals of police don't have the skills to screen those cases for signs of honor-based abuse. People are reporting it, but they just don't know it. How is that something that you've seen happen, and how do you address that?
I think identifying honor-based abuse and understanding how it works and the complex dynamics that sit behind it is a challenge for all concerned. I've seen other questions pop up around schools might identify it, but then make a referral and it isn't responded to. So I do accept that we need to assess risk better. We need to see it for what it is. We need to ensure that all the parts of the system are able to respond effectively. There needs to be better joint working, enhanced training and support. And I think that's why I started with that slide around partnership. Partnership is key to everything that we do. I think we need to recognise that this is underreported. It's not going away. That it will probably be it's resource intensive to respond to, because the risks go on. They're more complex. Whether the systems are in place currently to respond to them, that's a good question to ask. So what we do need is we need champions. We need, this has been driven by the campaigners and the survivors. We've come on such a long way in the last 20 years since Deanna started what we're doing here, and we're on a journey, but so it's the start rather than as anywhere near the end of the road. So probably not the answer that you want, but we got to recognise that this is complex, and it starts with people championing it as an issue and recognising that we've still got an awful long way to go.
Thank you, Alan. And while we're with you, I've got one more question for you here, which is that is there any indication that there will be another review of forces by HMIC, and what improvements do you think there have been since the last review?
I know the National Policing Lead is supporting calls for another inspection. I think that's the right thing to do because it focuses minds. It means that we're quite transparent and open, and that we keep the spotlight on honour-based abuse, and that's the right thing to do. Having been involved since I came into this world just as the last HMIC reviews was commencing, I can say that we're in a far better place in terms of our governance structures and our responses, and that many, if not all of the improvements that were recommended by HMIC, we've made huge progress on from a policing perspective. But that doesn't mean that we haven't got a long way to go, and that the response needs to be embedded. And it's not just around people like myself that have probably got relatively specialist skills around it. It's making sure that all frontline responders, or anyone with that is going to come across HBA, whether that be in school, social care, or elsewhere, because it's a whole systems approach, needs to be on the same page. We've come a long way, but as with the previous answer, we've still got a long way to go.
Thank you, Alan. Now, I think a question probably for Payzee and Deanna here. If someone suspects they know someone is at risk of honor-based violence, what should their first step be? Who should they contact? And that could be for as many people who want to answer it. But Diana, why don't we start with you?
Yes, thank you. I think, of course, if anyone is in the urgent need, they have to call 999. This is for urgent need for someone who is urgently and she is at risk. At that point, she has to call 999. But if, of course, the case is important and urgent, but she is not at risk at that moment, say, she can be dealt with the next day as well, or the same day they can call IKWRO. Our telephone number is 0207 920 6460. So everyone can call IKWRO and we will take the case forward. I have to say that many times we have been, women themselves has contacted police, but I'm afraid, or social services. I'm afraid they didn't help them properly, or they didn't take the case seriously. So we had to work on the case and we had to do the risk assessment. Then we found the case actually is very high risk. So we had to go with the case, and police accepted that this is a high risk case, and then they help them. So what we want really that because police is maybe the first contact for saving people's lives and taking the cases seriously and urgently. This is a very important matter, and I would like to mention to everyone that we have to work. Of course, this is a whole system approach, but then we need the safety to come first, and then plan for other things that we need. For example, the issue of court, how court will deal with the perpetrators, how the issue of culture will affect the court. I heard that 2 years ago, a man killed his bride because she was not virgin. And I heard that it was an Albanian case that the court decided that the husband should go for 1 or 2 years in prison because it was his culture to not accept an unvirgin woman. That happened in the UK just a few years ago. I mean, talking about 2 years ago, which is unacceptable. And so it is the whole system approach. But as I say, police in an emergency situation, IKWRO, and there are other organizations like Karma Nirvana and many more. But of course, we are here to help you and help anyone at risk.
Thanks, Diana. And Anne-Marie?
Yeah,
to add to that?
From a school perspective, meaning people I know, young people in schools who go to school and feel that way, there's two things. One is tell a trusted person, and that person who you feel able to talk to. So whether it's a good friend who's going to support you in going to a teacher, or going to the safeguarding lead, or ringing the NSPCC helpline. And also the NSPCC did a campaign a few years ago in relation to FGM, but you can use it in this scenario of for young people who are taken out the country when they get flown out, they put a spoon, a teaspoon in their underpants. So we called it spoony knickers, and it's more around the FGM. But any young person who's knows that they will be taken out the country, both Heathrow, all the kind of airports and places like that are kind of, trained to, when it goes off, separating that child from their family and speaking to them confidentially as well. So there's an element of you can equip yourself with something silver or something metal that's going to go off in the airports, as well as telling a trusted person that you're able to feel, that you've got control with, and they listen to you and understand your dilemma, your sensitivity around when you go home. Is it urgent? Is it not urgent? Again, and then helping you in how you feel safe. I've definitely encouraged that from that angle, because I think it's like what I think Diane just said there. Sometimes overreaction can lead to more problems for people. So it's kind of doing it where that young person feels able and safe. And again, looking at the urgency as well of immediate danger, again, hence the police, and sensitivities around potentially going in police protection, again, or refuge, whatever it might be, and all those other things. But the reality is people will listen and react in a way that is taken very seriously. Yeah.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. And I actually just want to ask you while we're here, we had a few questions asking, you mentioned you told us this case study, you told us this story when you were speaking. Tell us kind of what happened with that, if you mind sharing kind of the ending.
Sorry, I was aware of that when I got off, actually. I just ate me quickly. So with the young girl, she was put in police protection and far away from her family. And unfortunately, her family made contact with her through, again, that kind of lighthouse syndrome of people knowing where she was, even though she was in the secret hiding. And unfortunately, again, it was something where eventually through love, and I say this as in her mother kind of played at her heartstrings, and it's he said, she said, because we had information that they were in contact, they shouldn't have been in contact. And then within time, she kind of again wanted to go back home. So it was one where she retracted her statement again, even though we could argue that there was these flights booked and the marriage order was in place, forced marriage order. It was one where eventually it was very much where the seriousness had gone because the child wanted to go back. So again, like what again Payzee said, the whole grooming part, the whole bit about the bigger picture for this young person, she just wanted her mum, she wanted to be back home rather than the risk and the fear that's going to happen to her. The boy, again, he was, we challenged that family again, and in the end, we kind of did check out this religious school, and it was kind of school where they trained to be imams again, and we kind of looked at the Ofsted, obviously all those reports, etc. And again, it was seen to be a place where we worked with the young person about how they felt about going, with their voice in that. And again, definitely what Payzee was saying about the volume of where that child sits in that, and the voice they actually have, meaning the power, the fear, and the bigger picture, you know, like you said, relatives, community, everything from that perspective, him being a male as well, and all that what meant in that family. So unfortunately, again, with those that one, he went to the school. But we did equip him with all these different things about getting help for himself independently away from that. I hope that answers the outcome. So like what Alan said, wasn't great as far as, you know, success for us, but we did our best. But in the end, it came down to those individuals who, again, how complex it was with their family and the family ties, and they chose that over there at themselves. But hopefully, eventually, one day as they got older, they recognised and, you know, could do the right thing in that way.
Great, thank you so much, Anne-Marie. Okay, so we have an interesting question here. It says, in situations when honor-based abuse is identified in a personal setting, for example, a work colleague or a friend, what is the best way of sensitively approaching that person? Should you approach them directly or raise concerns with support agencies? And this person notes, I'm conscious specifically for those who may not identify what is happening. And I think, Payzee, I'd like for you to answer this because you specifically talk about this in kind of your comments earlier.
I would say, let's just bring this back to just seeing people as people. So you see somebody and you suspect that something's wrong and you suspect that it's honor-based abuse. It's as simple as asking that person, are you okay? Is everything okay? I think we have an inkling when something doesn't seem to sit right. And so that question in itself could actually give somebody the confidence to feel seen and to feel as though, even though they may be managing what they're going through, somebody has seen something, and that enough can be something that will help you to just say one thing that will help you to start the process to seek help. And again, I think if you are unsure, you can always ask for advice. You can always call IKWRO and you can always just ask the right questions and say, I'm not sure, this person is being closely monitored, or I've seen this, or, you know, they've suddenly said they're 16 and suddenly they're getting married. So it's just about looking out for those things and actually asking simple questions like, is everything okay? And just being aware. I think sometimes we play the bystander thing where we just think it's none of our business, but actually people's safety and everybody's safety around us, it is our business, and we have to make sure that we're responsible for each other. That way, that's how we can look out for one another and somebody else can look out for you. So just ask, are you okay? It can be as simple as that.
And I just want to expand on that, Payzee, because there's a couple of questions here very much in that same vein around, you know, how do you approach people? How do you talk about it? You know, do you feel that, you know, in the kind of work that you've done since then, that it wasn't really about someone coming to you and saying you're experiencing honor-based abuse, but actually someone coming to you and approaching you as a human and being open to that? I just want to, I guess I'm when I read the questions, there's a lot of people asking about this. How do we approach people? And I wonder if anyone actually, Payzee, Anne-Marie, Diana, if you have any comments on this. Anne-Marie, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I've got one. So I think in that I do get adults contacting the social media, the same scenario where they're in that scenario. And it's always about being non-judgmental, being approachable and understanding, and not having that fear of being called, you know, racist or culturally, you know, the cultural kind of button that people press. And understanding their dilemma from one where it's their life, it's their loved one, it's outside of work rather than what they see in the daytime. But again, sometimes at work they can appear very professional and very able and very competent, But away from work, that's not the case. Do you make sense? So some people convince themselves that this person is a sensible person. There may be a manager, whatever it might be, not understanding behind the scenes, they have none of that. They have no power, no status, and they're really caught up with that. So I think the more we see a woman, we see a person, like what you said, a person who's actually not in control of what's happening to them. And we can support them in being able to have a listening ear in a non-judgmental way, and supporting them and slowly coaching them and helping them to be in a place where they're able to do something. And you have to be very patient with that as well. Patience, very patient. That's what I would say from my experiences of supporting people, both male and female, in that scenario as well, or hence young adults in that. I hope that's helpful.
Great. Thank you so much. Payzee or Diana, is there anything you want to add to that?
Oh yeah, yes, I can say that. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think it is very sensitive and very serious, this matter that needs to be taking it immediately, and we shouldn't postpone to respond to those cases to next day and another day, because when they are at risk, they are at risk. After risk assessment, maybe you can decide to take different action, but seriously and sensitively, they have to take it immediately. I think ensuring the confidentiality is extremely important, and not mediating between the person and the family, and not sharing information at all with the family. Especially this is with the of course sexual services. They have got a difficult situation here, because in one way they have to share the information with the family, in another way this is honor-based violence cases, and for the safety of the girl they shouldn't do that. So I think the second way, they have to choose and not share any information with the family. Taking risk assessment is very important. Then having a multi-agency approach and involve the other organization with the consent of the girl or the survivor, to have an action plan and ensure the safety measure and safety management for her. Again, I will ask to contact IKWRO. Our advisors all are trained and professionals in their work, and they are specialists, and they can take extra steps to save anyone who are at risk.
Thank you, Diana. So we've had so many questions, but unfortunately our time together is coming to an end. We'll make sure we save these questions, and I know that the team at the IKWRO will find a way to answer them through their work going forward. I wanted to ask if each of our speakers who are still with us, so Anne-Marie, Payzee, and Diana, if you could just take 30 seconds and tell people, maybe from your professional perspective or from the perspective you're coming from, if they wanted to do one thing, if this session has inspired them to do something, what would you recommend that to be?
Of course, my advice is mainly for those who are at risk, that for themselves, they need to take it seriously as well. Do not say that it's happened for another woman, doesn't happen for me because my father and my parents love me. It's not the case. The honor is very strong and very powerful, and they have to take it seriously. And for professionals to take those cases, as I say, very with sensitivity, it is immediate needs to respond. And for government and other funder, really organizations that they are working in this field, they need funds to be able to continue their very important and safe living work. So I invite everyone to support the work of IKWRO and other organizations.
I'd say definitely for professionals, training training in the area around honour-based abuse in all the subjects that we've discussed, remembering from the perspective of other kind of groups in that, where the children, the whole thing about sexuality, gender, etc., that can make someone also at risk, but also urgency, like what we're clearly hearing, urgency, sensitivity, confidentiality, and patience in that, but also acknowledging immediate danger and immediate risk. For other people, I think it's around being culturally sensitive again, but at the same time, respecting the human being for the person and the support they need, urgently. And again, emphasising confidentiality and the reality of fatality in this too. Hence what kind of we were saying here about the reality of the immediate danger of what's going to happen next, as in fatality. So definitely something about take it very seriously, but understand the bigger picture and don't get caught up in the culture part of I can't say anything. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. And Payzee, finally to you.
I would say that there is a lot of online events happening, and that we're all engaged in these amazing conversations that are happening right now around gender violence. Please, I would urge you, don't let this be another conversation webinar that you've attended that you forget about and you think it doesn't affect me. I'm not really sure if anyone around me is experiencing this. I urge you to please continue this conversation, read more about it, learn about it, and speak to your friends, speak to your colleagues, and try and further this, and so that awareness just keeps going and going. Thank you.
Thank you, Payzee. Thank you, Anne-Marie. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Alan and Savin. Thank you to all of you for watching. I want to leave you with just two quick thoughts. Three quick thoughts. One of them is to say that for more information, for resources, for training, IKWRO is an amazing organization. You know, you can go and check out their work. I know that over the years I've interacted with them, as someone who doesn't work in this professionally, I have learned so much and become better equipped to support those around me who may be experiencing honor-based abuse. The second thing is that some of you have asked whether this session will be available to watch later. Yes, it will. You can use this same link to watch it, but you can also find it on IKWRO's YouTube channel, and later today. And then the third thing is I wanted to answer my last question myself, which is what you can do. And one of the things that you can do is you can support this amazing work. We know that this is a difficult time with everything going on, and we've heard from some of our speakers how COVID has exacerbated the very situations that people who experience honor-based abuse find themselves in. So organizations like IKWRO, you know, they need as much resource as possible to support these vulnerable individuals out there in the community. And you can do that really simply by texting IKWRO to 70085 to donate £5 today. And just that small donation can really go quite a long way. So thank you so much. So thank you to all of you. Thank you for our speakers. Yeah, I hope that you now all feel more confident and empowered to take these conversations forward and act.